Welcome to Saga Thing, where we're putting the Sagas of the Icelanders on trial. I'm John.
And I'm Andy. Welcome to the judgment episode of our discussion of Reykjadal Saga och Killer-Skuta. And while this saga has some charm to it, I have to admit that I'm not sorry to be finishing up with this one.
Yeah, I understand. But come on, it's been great exploring a saga that we've never really made time for.
Yeah, that's true.
This is actually one of the real benefits of this podcast for us. Besides getting us in touch with some great saga fans out there, it's also pushed us to broaden our own knowledge of the sagas.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, this is one of those sagas that you know's out there, maybe, but it's easy to skip when there are heavy hitters like Grettir and Laxdala and famous texts like Hrafnkel or Gisli. And we're always under some pressure to read and reread the texts that get more critical attention.
Well, sure. But, I mean, that's sort of self-perpetuating, right? I mean, the critically important sagas are the ones that critics read and write about.
Yeah, well, that's exactly the point I'm making. I think we've already found a couple of gems among the lesser-known sagas, and I know I'm really, really interested in at some point, returning to Vigland's saga and writing some stuff about that, if only I could find the time to do that.
Right. And I feel like we've had some similar insights emerge from our discussion of Reykjadal.
Now, wait a minute. You really think so?
Yeah.
Oh, you don't sound too confident. Now, I do smell a little bit of a digression coming on here, and all I'm trying to do is drive a stake through Reykjadal's black fly-infested heart and maybe move on to our next saga.
Wow. You really have some issues with this one, don't you?
Oh, just you wait. No, although, my wife recently pointed out that, we'll often bash a saga only to end up scoring it high, or we'll praise a saga throughout and then undercut it at the end, so.
Is that right? Like where?
Well, I think, honestly, she was disappointed in our scoring of Finnbogi's saga. I know it was a fun saga, and I think I was pretty effusive about it as we went through, but...
Wait a minute. You're not looking to change your score again, are you?
No. Switching once was embarrassing enough.
And hilarious.
Oh, sure it was, maybe for you. But I am going to stand by that adjusted score. I think it's appropriate.
So how do you justify the discrepancies between our presentation and our scores for your wife?
Well, I just said that it's scholars being scholars.
Oh, so dismissive.
I think that's kind of true, though. I tend to think of my final judgment as completely separate from my gut reaction to the saga itself. I don't really approach that score simply as a reader. There are a lot of factors to consider when scoring a saga. But I tend to favor a few things in particular, like obviously aesthetics and characterization and something I like to call saga-iness.
This is your scholarly term, saga-iness? Is that even a word?
Well, it is now. Yeah, I coined it.
Care to define it for us?
Saga-iness. It is of or having the quality of a saga.
Uh-huh.
But I think that it has to feel like a saga and hit the right notes. Or if the author's really good, be aware of saga conventions, play with them, do something interesting with them.
That's fair. Mm-hmm. So given that definition, I also enjoy a good saga that's really saga-y.
I thought so, and who doesn't? But the last and most important thing for me in particular is how a saga fits into and responds to a moment. That could be a literary moment, a style of literature, like the fascinating Spesarþáttur at the end of Grettir's saga, or even a cultural moment like what we found in Vigland's saga, talking about, marriages and things like that, betrothal customs. A saga that reveals something about the moment, one that really engages in dialogue with that moment, that saga gets big bonus points from me. And that's probably why a saga like Finnbogi's saga, which is fairly simplistic and folkloric in nature, had to get a lower score in the end, despite how much I enjoyed reading it. So there.
That's interesting. I probably, what I look for in a saga is a saga that reads simply, but its construction is quite complex. And so as you're reading it, you're carried along on a narrative that feels very controlled, feels very confident. And then the more you dig into the saga, the more of a web you find underneath it.
Interesting.
That a saga that really has a kind of a convoluted structure underneath its surface really appeals to me.
So that would explain why a Grettir would score so highly for you, whereas
a Grettir or an Eyrbyggja saga, things like that. Yeah.
And I think my reasons for scoring those high is completely different. It's interesting. All right. So I kind of derailed us here. I'm sorry about that.
Yes, you did. Yeah. And you were trying to get us on task, if I recall.
Was I really?
Yeah. You didn't want to hear about the insights we've had while reading Reykjadal
because we don't have any.
Something about sniffing out a digression, I believe.
Oh, yes. Yes. Well, the scent of one digression leads to another around here, so.
Yeah, it does seem that way.
Well, anyways, I forgive you. So
kind.
What did you want to say?
You forgive me. Gee, thanks. I was just going to say that I feel like we've been able to find some value in this saga, despite the lack of critical attention.
Well, the critical silence, I think, speaks volumes. It's almost like a collective critical statement. This is not a saga people generally think is worth spending a great deal of time on. And honestly, to a certain extent, they're probably right.
Well, that doesn't really help justify our own nearly 3 hours worth of podcast time already spent on the saga.
That is a lot.
But we haven't even gotten to judgments yet. We're probably going to break over 4 hours total on this thing.
I know. By the way, have you considered the implications of all that?
Yeah, I'm trying to get to one of them right now.
Well, don't let me get in your way.
Thank you.
But one thing real quick.
Great.
No. The one thing I want to bring up is that we're probably accidentally producing the single longest evaluation of Reykjadal in English, even if it is mostly summer. So there's that.
Yikes. I hadn't really considered that. This poor saga. Hasn't it suffered enough already? Does it really deserve what we've done to it?
Oh, it deserves it. No, I'm not sure our listeners, who are such great people, deserve to suffer through all of this, but it's too late to save them. But we are pulling this one out of its centuries-long obscurity and sharing it with thousands of people, so that's kind of cool.
I don't know if people in Iceland who can read it in Icelandic necessarily think that it's had centuries-long obscurity.
Really, find me an Icelander who's read this recently.
That's a good point.
Yeah,
that's a good point.
There you go. So if you are an Icelander and you are deeply familiar and passionate about Reykjadal Saga, you contact us and let us know. But
I'm sure there's a handful of people in the Mývatn area who regard this as a very important saga.
Honestly, you're probably right. I would bet you, if you go to Mývatn and in the gift shops, you might find this particular saga. But if you sit them down and say, do you like this one? If you compare it to the other ones, what will they say?
They'd say, boy, I really enjoyed Njál Saga.
Yeah, right? Or they'll lie to your face and say, I love Reykjadal Saga. I really do. Why don't you buy a copy? All right. So what was the point you're trying to make?
Well, we spent quite a bit of time talking about the strange tone of this saga. There are all these moments when the writer admits that there are multiple versions of the story he's telling, and he really seems like at a loss to decide which version to trust.
Well, he solves the problem pretty handily. He's a deft author, he is. He just writes them all down into this narrative and never resolves them.
Yes. But whether it's deliberate or accidental, that creates a kind of verisimilitude that a more polished work doesn't have. A lot of this saga reads like someone conducting research about historical events.
Yeah, that's true.
Bad research, not always presented in the best light, but it creates an effect.
Who are we to adjudge how good his scholarship is? But it does create an effect. I'll give you that.
You know what I mean. It's like the narrative equivalent of the shaky handheld camera work in the Blair Witch Project. It's real-ish.
Yeah, that's a good comparison.
And the apparent lapses into amateurishness just kind of add to the veneer of realism.
There's really something to that, and we had a great comment about something similar to that from our listener, Arian.
Oh, she agrees with me? Well, she already sounds smart.
So, here it is. So here's her note about Reykjadal. She says, I won't argue. Should I do this in a woman's voice? I feel like Arian's definitely
No, I think you're fine.
Okay.
I think your voice is close enough.
Really? You know her?
No.
All right. She says, I won't argue that it's well written, and I won't argue that it's either compelling or inspiring. I will, however, say that the combination of the petty goings-on and oral history style to it do have me feeling like these were real people. I can't help thinking and laughing that these people would be up to petty workplace shenanigans if they were alive today. It might be a stapler in a rival's desk drawer rather than a sheep in his pen, but the idea would be the same. They accomplished no great deeds, fought over fairly pointless arguments, and caused much of their own misery, but that all makes it feel pretty plausible to me, which is that's perfect.
That's one hell of an epitaph for this saga.
Yeah.
No, I think that's exactly right. I could say more about this, but I'm afraid I'll convince myself that this is actually a good saga if we keep going.
Well, I think there are arguments to say that this isn't a terrible saga, but we're not going to do that. I think we'll let Arian have the last word here, at least for now.
Okay. So are we ready to start dissecting this frog?
These analogies of yours. But yes, let's crack this thing open, shall we? Ooh.
Best bloodshed.
Now, the style of writing in this saga doesn't exactly fit with our judgment categories as much as we might like all the time, but fortunately the author didn't leave us completely high and dry. So I think we've actually got some decent candidates for best bloodshed for you.
Indeed we do. Why don't you go ahead and do the honors and start?
Gladly I will. Now, for most of these, you might have to use your imagination a little bit if you read the saga, because the author basically reports these events as dryly as he possibly can.
Yeah.
But I've got two candidates that are pretty good. The first one comes from chapter 13. We've got a farmer named Gnup, and he got caught up in a feud between Steingrim and Vaemund. Now, I don't need to provide a lot of detail here since we covered this in the first part of our summary, but Gnup ends up killing Herjolf, the completely innocent and much better brother of Vaemund.
That's right. Because they couldn't get at Vaemund because he was actually defended, they killed his brother instead.
Yeah, and well, because of this, Gnup finds himself in some hot water with Vaemund, understandably, and after tracking Gnup's movements, that's kind of a fun name to say, actually. I don't run across Gnup very often, but it sounds like a drop of water kind of hitting the Gnup. Anyway, Vaemund confronts Gnup on the gravel flats of Laugaland, and they both know why they're there, and they begin fighting at once, and so I'll read the saga from here. It says, both of them had a shield, and they fought for a long time. At length, Vaemund took off Gnup's lower leg, so he stood on his knees and wanted to fight on. But Vaemund said they would stop for the time.
And then Vaemund beheads him, right?
No, not exactly. He kind of just goes home, leaves him there.
It's not all that impressive, if I'm being completely honest.
You know what? I completely agree with you. I only wanted to bring this one up because it reminds me of the Black Knight from Monty Python and the Holy Grail. He also ends up on the ground begging for the fight to continue while Arthur rides away, so that's what's in my head.
No, that is pretty similar.
It is. And I don't think it's a great candidate as a saga best bloodshed, but I have always loved the Black Knight, and Gnup gave me a chuckle because of that, so thanks.
Well, I'm afraid that wasn't the author's intent, but if it makes you happy, then I guess it works.
It does make me happy. So what's your first candidate?
Okay, so my first candidate is something that we actually got a question about on our Facebook page from Tim. The question was about the moment late in the saga when Skuta and Glum's forces are facing one another across a wide river.
Oh yes, I know this one.
Yeah, the river is so wide that Glum and his friends believe they can safely shout insults without worrying about retribution. Mm-hmm. But when Skuta hears them laughing about the death of his friend Havard of Isoltunga, the saga tells us, Skuta shot a spear with a throwing string across the ford and hit a man called Thrand. Thrand is killed, by the way. So we've got this moment when Skuta flings a spear a distance everyone assumes is impossible, using a throwing string.
Yeah. So what is
the actual word in Icelandic is snaraspjóti, which literally means spear thrower.
Okay.
So here's what I've worked out. There's a kind of handheld spear throwing aid called an atlatl, which is basically a shaft with a hollowed out trench that a spear thrower holds in his or her hand.
That's right, yeah.
It adds leverage and force to the throw. It was used by people around the world, in America, Australia, Africa, and so on.
I've actually used an atlatl before.
Have you really?
I did, and I was quite good with it, if I do say so myself.
How did that come up?
Well, I took the kids up to the Natural History Museum in Cleveland, and there was a little display outside. A guy was showing people how to use the atlatl and talking about what it was. And they had a little, like an artificial deer set up that you could throw your spear at with the atlatl.
Like one of those like foam deer.
Yeah, something like practice,
that. Yeah.
And they kind of marked out what the spots you wanted to hit, might be. Anyway, so they let me use the atlatl, and we just stood a distance away and then used this thing to throw it. And I'll be honest with you, I wasn't that far away. Maybe just a football field length away,
Oh, sure.
Yeah. But anyway, I used the atlatl and threw it, and it not only kind of leveled the way that I would throw the spear normally, because I'm not a good spear thrower. But I was very accurate. I hit the deer right where I needed to, a couple times.
That actually makes a lot of sense, because one of the qualities of an atlatl is that it makes bad spear throwers good.
Oh, well, I'm an atlatl guy.
So it's the Natural History Museum in Cleveland. Do they have a display for the last time you guys won a championship in any sport, or does the museum not go back that far?
Let's move on. Tell us more about these spear throwing things.
Cool. So anyway, the atlatl is not what this is.
Well, thanks for sharing and wasting our time.
Because the author calls it a throwing string, right?
Does he?
It's actually a spear thrower, but it's pretty clear from the context that it's meant to be something small that's attached to the spear, not a big wooden thing that he's carrying. No one knows what he's doing until he does it.
Okay.
Right. So it's not like a big implement that he's using. It's this little, I think it's a sort of sling or thong version of the atlatl, which is usually called an ancule or an amentum. It was used by the Greeks and Romans in hunting and in javelin throwing competitions. It works the same way as an atlatl. Right? It's essentially looped onto the spear shaft so the thrower's hand and arm can be in a more natural throwing position, right? And adds distance and accuracy to the throw. In the 19th century, a French general in Napoleon's army experimented with ancules and found that they increased a man's accurate throwing range by up to 4 times.
That's pretty cool.
So that a man who could throw a javelin accurately 20 yards might achieve 80 yards with an ancule.
I would say, as the Mythbusters might say, this is plausible so far.
Oh, plausible. I like that.
Yeah.
So given that the distance Skuta covers is farther than anyone thinks it's possible to hurl a spear, I think we're probably looking at an ancule.
Okay.
Now, we know that ancules were used in Rome and Greece, but they're also found wherever the Romans ended up, which means more or less all over Europe. The Gauls, the Portuguese, the pre-Moorish Spanish all used them. Ancules are also mentioned in Irish legendary poems, and remains of them have been found in digs in Denmark.
Oh, I'm surprised by that.
Yeah, so they know that they were known in the Scandinavian world as well. And of course, spear fishing all over the world relies on a similar thong hold that allows you to dart the spear forward. But they aren't generally featured in the sagas, and no one in the story apart from Skuta seems to know that using one of these things is a possibility. And as I said, nobody even realizes what he's doing until he does it.
Yeah.
So I think what we've got here is a bit of weaponcraft that Skuta picked up in his years spent abroad, either in the Mediterranean or elsewhere, that he's brought back with him. And that's just so cool.
Yes, it
because
is.
I think even the author doesn't seem to know how to acknowledge this, which lends a definite air of authenticity to this moment, and in any case, it's a great kill.
It sure is.
So there you go.
Okay.
Spearing a guy from across a wide river using an ancule.
Well, I think that's really, really cool. So nice job researching that, John.
So you said you had 2. What's the next one?
Oh, I don't know. Only the surefire winner of Best Bloodshed for this saga, and perhaps even for the second quarter court, whenever that is. So,
is that so? Well, please share.
I will. Well, you know how saga characters love to send assassins to kill their enemies.
I absolutely do. It's a time-honored tradition.
It is. And it's a good touch of saga-iness, if I do say so myself.
Are you really, you're gonna keep trying to coin that word, aren't you?
No, it's really not worth doing, which is why I'll keep doing it. But in this saga, Killer-Skuta seems to have figured out a great way of exposing the man behind the assassin. In chapter 21, Skuta figures out that a man called Grim was likely sent by Thorgeir the Gothi.
Your Thingman, I believe.
Yes, my Thingman was involved. Grim was likely sent, I was saying before being interrupted, by a highly fictionalized and exaggerated version of Thorgeir the Gothi that bears little resemblance to the man himself. And Thorbjorg Cheekstruck.
Apparently you're not going to try to reserve Thorberg's character. It's just Thorgeir you're trying to save.
I think this is Thorbjorg Cheekstruck and how he lived his life, yes, but not
Go
Thorgeir.
on.
Anyway, rather than kill Grim outright, like all our other saga heroes do, Skuta drags him out to an island on Mývatn Lake entirely naked, and there he ties him to a stake and says that he's going to stay there until Thorgeir saves him.
Now, I think I'm going to question your sequence of events there. I think he actually drags him out to the lake, out to the island, and then strips him naked. I don't think he's rowing out there
I thought the same
with this
thing,
guy naked in the rowboat. That seems a little weird.
I thought the same thing, but when I went to prep this, I looked at the actual saga, and the phrasing that they use says, hold on, let me find it real quick. Yeah, in chapter 21, John, I went and looked this up. It says, it is said that Skuta took Grim out to an island in the Mývatn Lake, entirely naked. So,
oh dear.
Then he tied him to a stake and said he would be there for some time.
That has got to be an awkward ride in the rowboat.
Doesn't it, though? So, it could be just a translation issue, but I'm just going with what my saga says.
Fair enough.
So, naked rowboat rides for everyone.
Well, I mean, it is a brilliant move. I mean, this whole staking out Grim on the island, not stripping him before you get in the boat. Because doing this forces Thorgeir to admit his role in the plot.
Absolutely.
If he goes and, does anything. Because that would be useful in a lawsuit to know that Thorgeir admits he has a relationship with this guy.
Sure. And if Thorgeir were to submit and go fetch this man, that was true. But when Thorgeir learns of this grim situation, he...
Oh, I see what you did there.
I had to pause there so you can get it, yeah. He asks Thorberg and his son if they want to rescue old Grim, but they refuse to help, saying, "We don't care where Grim is." And so, poor naked Grim is left on the island where he is tormented by hunger and midge bites until he dies. And it really is one of the most excruciating and ugly deaths that we've seen in the sagas. So you just try and beat that, John. What do you have for your last one?
I want to at least bring up Steingrim and his men falling into the icy river as they attempt to attack Vemund Fringe.
Yeah, that's a great scene.
So what's happening at this moment is that Steingrim is looking for a way to cross the river and get at Vemund. It's sort of a bad decision on his part to choose the attack at a moment when they're on the wrong side of a river from their enemies. But Steingrim saw they would not get anything done while they could get no closer. The only thing was to try to find a way over the ice to Oskel and his company. Then Oskel spoke to Steingrim and told him to cross the ice carefully, that it was not safe. Which, as we said, is sort of an odd moment for Oskel, sort of, being generous to a fault to his enemies.
Yeah.
But at this point, it is said that the ice broke beneath Steingrim and his men after Helgi, the first of Steingrim's men to cross the river, is hit in the chest with an axe and falls back into the river and shatters the ice. Now at this point, some claim Vemund shot Steingrim with a spear when he tried to come up through a hole in the ice, and that caused his death. And some say he drowned there in the hole. Along with Steingrim, 2 other men drowned, and 2 of his company were killed. Helgi, his kinsman-in-law, and 1 other man. Right, so what we've got here is just men falling into the water, thrashing around, trying to make their way back up through the ice, drowning in the water because they can't get back up through the ice. And then the ones that do stick their heads above the water being stuck through with spears as Vemund's men just throw spear after spear at them. It's a brutal, just an absolute killing field. 5 men dead in the water. Nobody even knows whether Steingrim dies by drowning or by spear. It's that kind of chaos. And the survivors have to sort of limp away.
Yeah, in terms of scenes that you'd like to see in a movie, this one certainly is far more entertaining.
Yes,
it's a dramatic moment. That said,
is.
the bloodshed is a little disappointing in that Steingrim's men just fall in the river and then they get spears.
Well, some of them are killed. Well, one of them is killed by an axe to the chest. Another one is killed by a spear.
That one is pretty cool. I imagine a slow motion falling back, a lot of ice breaking water, slow mo.
Right, lots of no.
I would hope not.
But
a lot of high definition water splashing and ice breaking. That's cool.
Sure.
Beards getting wet.
But I think damp beards aside.
Yeah.
I think that poor Grim on the island. It's hard to beat that.
It is, I understand
Death
that the
by
Steingrim
exposure and midge bite is really hard to top.
While not a light best bloodshed, it is a damn fine winner.
We will row the award out to the island and leave it by Grim. Something for him to look at while he waits.
Body count.
So the body count this time around was pretty straightforward, which is always a pleasant surprise.
Well, wait a minute, that is a surprise. Didn't we come up with different numbers?
Yes, we did, but your count was wrong. On a lot of counts, actually, it was wrong.
Hold on a minute. How was mine wrong?
Well, because I came up with 51, and you had 52, so you were off by 1.
Oh, your arrogance would be breathtaking if I didn't need my breath to laugh.
Ooh.
First of all, need I remind you that your original count was actually 48. You forgot to count the 3 Norwegians with their weapon nicknames, despite the fact that they were introduced, killed, and then buried. It's not like their deaths were hidden in a footnote somewhere.
Okay, well, I'd like to point out, first of all, that nobody in our listening audience would have known that until you brought it up.
Well, that's why I brought it up.
I know. Well, that's neither here nor there. My final count, admittedly after a brief reminder, was a solid 51, and that's the right one.
And mine was 52. The discrepancy arose over the death of Alfhild, a woman who'd been living with Skuta.
Yeah, and if everyone's saying, who? Alfhild? Never heard of her. That's because she shouldn't count. She's not a character in the saga, and her death is reported as an aside. We run into this problem all the time, and we don't usually count randomly introduced people who are suddenly reported to have died.
Alfhild is present, has been present, and has just died. The Saga's failure to mention her before this point does not mean she isn't there. We count any number of deaths in this saga of people who aren't mentioned until they die. Farmhands, neighbors, random people who get in Skuta's way, and they all count.
Well, first of all, that's not fair. Nearly everything in this saga is a quick mention that's reported in a fairly dispassionate and distanced tone. I mean, we'd have to exclude most of the deaths if we did that. And second of all, when we count an offstage death like Vaemund, for example, well, that just makes sense. Vaemund actually plays a role in the saga. Farmhands that get killed kind of play a role, although I'm starting to see your point just a little bit, but I'm not going to cave. I mean, news of the death is pretty important for Vaemund, regardless of whether it's on screen or not. But
okay, no,
Alfhild's not.
Don't set up a straw man here. Notice I didn't argue against counting Vaemund. I'm willing to accept offstage deaths when they're relevant. All
right, so when they're relevant, and Alfhild's death is not terribly relevant, other than it clears a path conveniently for the quest for a new wife.
Well, that's at least as relevant as any number of dead farmhands, but we do need to move on. I think, unless you're ready to concede,
nope,
that we'll just have to split this one and say that there are either 51 deaths or 52, depending on whether you're Andy or any reasonable reader of the saga.
Oh, and let's not forget, as we sometimes do, we've got to remember the animals. The poor animals.
Yes.
And this saga was actually pretty kind to animals, but we did lose 2 oxen.
Yes. These are the 2 oxen that Vaemund basically stole from Steingrim.
That's right. He claims that he wanted to give them as a gift to his uncle Oskil, but his theft of the oxen results in the deaths of a few men, including Svart, Thorleif, and one unnamed man, whose death we did count, so, you know, we have a point. And when Hrafn gallops off to get Steingrim, Vaemund then chops the heads off the oxen, rather than let Steingrim get them.
Vaemund really is a despicable character, isn't he?
He's despicable.
Yeah, he and Henthor have to be rivals for the title of most petty Icelander.
Oh, John, they may be rivals, but there's no competition there. Henthor wins that one, even with his chicken legs tied together.
All right. So, 51 or 52 and 2 oxen. It's not bad for a body count.
No, it's not. Now, hold on. Before we finish this, I've got one more important bit of body count business to cover.
Do you? What is it?
Well, a long, long time ago, although not that long ago, one of our listeners
far away.
One of our listeners contacted me about our approach to body count.
Oh, I'm actually surprised we haven't had more people contacting us to complain. We're kind of a mess when it comes to body count. I mean, we've got these rules, but I often wonder whether we should just write them down, because I'm not sure we know all of them ourselves.
Oh, stop. I know all the rules, and I think they're pretty clear. I just think that you never pay attention to them.
Oh, here's what I think. I think the guy who's on record as being incapable of counting units of measurement or doing straightforward single-digit multiplication probably shouldn't get snippy about which one of us has more trouble remembering rules. I also think you should move this along and get to the listeners' comments before the body count for this saga suddenly goes up by 1.
Ooh, is that a threat from you, John?
Merely an observation, but please go on.
Okay. Well, since you're so interested in measurements, that's exactly what this has to do with, and I'm going to cover it. This suggestion comes to us from Greg, way back in February. I responded to him a while ago, but never got around to implementing the idea. So I'm hoping to do that tonight. He says this: I've listened to most of the episodes, and I want to thank you for making my workday go by more quickly, which is very, very nice of him. I appreciate it.
Thank you very much, Greg.
Yeah. And Greg has an interesting idea for us that might complicate things somewhat, but it would also provide for a more interesting point of comparison between the sagas that we cover.
Okay, I'm intrigued.
As you should be. I'm intrigued as well. And that's why I'm sharing this. So, Greg recommends that we include a deaths per page statistic in our body count.
Very interesting.
Yes, I was thinking we could call it something like a body count density measurement, or a BCDM for short. What do you think?
BCDM? I don't know that an acronym is really necessary. It seems to make it a little more grandiose than it is.
It's very scientific.
I like the idea. It does provide a different perspective for the body count report.
Yeah, I agree. Only creating a deaths per page ratio wouldn't really work, because that number is going to change based on which translation we're using or another person's using.
Right. So the ICBM count, or whatever it is, for Grettir's Saga. What's that?
Wait, hold on. Not ICBM. I don't know. That might be something from the 70s. We're talking about the BCDM.
BCDM. Got it.
Yes,
okay.
body count density measurement.
Right. Not intercontinental ballistic missiles. So the BCDM for Grettir's Saga, for example, would be completely different depending on which translation you were using. I mean, Morris, Scudder, Paulson, Fox, Byock are all going to have different page numbers.
Exactly. But I want to say this. We do happen to have a very reliable and consistent measurement of saga length lying around that we could use instead.
Ooh! Are you thinking of Hravinkels, perchance?
Oh, I am. Now, I know it's a silly measurement, but it does
a
suit
silly
our
measurement.
podcast.
This is my day of glory.
Our unit of measurement should therefore be a little bit silly. So what do you say to a body count density measurement, or BCDM, that's derived from a deaths to Hravinkels ratio?
Oh, I think that's a brilliant idea.
I
knew that the day of Hravinkels would come.
I really didn't, but there you go. Fate works in mysterious ways. Okay, so we've got 51 deaths in this saga, and Reykjadal Saga
52.
came in at 51, and Reykjadal came in at 2.6 Hravinkels.
That's right.
And if I have done my math correctly, we should...
Oh dear. I might need to jump in here.
No, I got
Tag
this.
me in.
It's just basic division. I can handle it.
I know. That's why I'm worried.
Be quiet. So here's what I've got. The BCDM for Reykjadal Saga is 19.615, which means that for every Hrafinkel in the saga, we've got 19.615 deaths.
So we're going with 3 decimal places. Any particular reason?
There's no reason at all. It's completely arbitrary. Would you prefer to just round up to a whole number or something?
No, I like the percentages. I think we can just go to two places beyond the decimal point, though. I mean, there's no need to get crazy. I mean, some of these may go on and on.
Well, yeah, they definitely go on and on, but I thought 3 was, makes it seem a little more serious. But anyway, just for comparison, I did a BCDM for 2 other sagas that we've covered.
And which ones are those?
I chose Eyrbyggja Saga and Vatnsdæla Saga. Now, I'll give you the Hrafinkel measurement for each, and you tell me which one you think has a higher BCDM.
Okay, I think I like this game.
Okay, so here we go. Eyrbyggja Saga was 4.3 Hrafinkels, and Vatnsdæla Saga was a bit shorter, coming in at 3.21 Hrafinkels. So which one do you think had the higher body count density?
Oh, it's gotta be Eyrbyggja. I mean, that saga had the second highest body count so far, right? I distinctly remember it was over 100 dead.
Well, that's correct. It's a very good memory, Mr. Memory Man. Anyway, Eyrbyggja Saga had 101 deaths to Vatnsdæla Saga's 41 deaths. So Eyrbyggja Saga comes in with a body count density measurement of 23.48, and Vatnsdæla is only a mere 12.72.
This is very interesting. I like this plan because it's actually, I feel like this reflects more the sense you get of the rate of death when you're reading the saga.
Absolutely. So, I mean, Vatnsdæla Saga, this reveals that Vatnsdæla Saga might be a longer saga, but there are more deaths per Hrafinkels in a saga like Reykjadal Saga.
Right. Very interesting. I like this plan. Thanks, Greg.
Yes, and I'm hoping this will hopefully anyways, make the body count category a bit more interesting in the future. Gives us something to talk about.
Of course, now we're going to have to go back and recalculate all the sagas we've covered to this point. But I say, let's do it. Anything that makes the Hrafinkel a more important part of the podcast.
All right,
on to our next category. Nicknames.
All right, now, as I was reading this saga, I noticed that there were a lot of nicknames. Would you concur, John?
I thought so too. There aren't as many as you would think. There's
Maybe
only a little over
page
30 in the saga.
Well, it's a shorter saga, so, that's not too bad.
But I would say they're disproportionately bizarre.
Yes, yeah, I think maybe that's what I noticed more. The nicknames popped out a lot more, like Fishing Pole and Butter Ring, for example.
Right. Enough of them demand our attention that I've had to make some brutal cuts. We're going to be skipping over Thorstein Crag, Thorleif Fox, Thorstein the Blind, Thorstein Bullcalf. There's a lot of Thorsteins. And the Norwegian brothers, Von Spear, Nafar Shortsword, and Skeffel the Sword.
Now, those aren't as interesting, but I have it on good authority that Thorstein Crag, was that the first guy? Thorstein Crag? Yeah. I have it on good authority that he has a very large posterior, thus the nickname.
Are you serious?
No,
okay,
I just heard rumors about the bathhouse.
Well, that's charming. Thank you for that contribution to nicknames. Now,
I'll just sit back now and let you take over.
So I'm going to start off with Killer-Skuta and Killer Gloom.
Okay.
The nickname there is Viga. This is actually a pretty common nickname in the sagas, but it's unusual to see two men with the same nickname facing off against each other. Both of these guys earn their name. Glum kills repeatedly over the course of this saga, and his hatred of Thorberg Cheekstruck means that the second half of this saga is actually a three-way feud, with Glum scoring kills against both of his enemy's supporters.
Yeah, that is kind of interesting.
It's an element of the saga that I really wish were kind of exploited more.
Right. Maybe we should read Viga Glum's saga to find out all the answers to that.
Well, I believe we shall. So Skuta, on the other hand, is responsible directly or indirectly for over a dozen killings by himself. And let's not forget that he won our Best Bloodshed prize for staking poor Grim out on Hraven Rock to die.
Nice move there.
Which one is more deserving of the nickname? That, I think, is for the coroner to decide. Next, we have Thorir Leatherneck, or Leatherhals. This is exactly what it sounds like. A Thorir's got a leathery neck. The reason I bring it up at all is that it suggests a reference to someone known for working in the sun. A neck browned and toughened like leather. And I find that interesting because Thorir is the father of the Fjorlifersons, and their behavior throughout the saga suggests a certain kind of spoiled privilege to me. While their father is a leathery, hardworking man. They're also significantly known by their mother's name rather than their father's name. It's an interesting juxtaposition, but it's never addressed directly, right? Thorir, as far as we can tell, is an absent father, and we don't learn anything about him. Speaking of his sons, next one is Vaemund Fringe. What's meant here, the word is kogur, or kugur. It means fringe in the sense of a fringe of material on a blanket or some other cloth. Not a cooler, like edge of the Badlands kind of fringe. It has limited associations with a child's swaddling cloth, but I'm sort of suspecting that here it means some article of clothing that Vaemund wears. Which I have to say is disappointingly mundane for such a lunatic character.
Well, I think, he's wearing, I'm guessing, slightly flashier clothes if it's got a
that could
nice
very well
little
be.
fringe to it.
Yeah.
He is a very proud individual, so that kind of suits him.
That's a good point. Remember we saw with Berg the Bold, right? The fringed cloak that he then cuts the edge off of as being considered an especially flashy kind of thing. Thorir Goatbeard. Gatskegi. This is my requisite beard nickname for this saga, and it's a good one. I'm making the assumption here that goat beard is a physical descriptor rather than a zoomorphic reference to his character. A goat beard is a fairly distinctive looking thing, right? That's why we English speakers call a goatee a goatee. It seems that Thorir's got a long, waggly beard, possibly worn along on his chin, but trimmed along his cheeks and jawline. It's probably not our winner, but I'm pleased to have old goat beard on board.
Yeah. And in Thorir's defense, some people just can't really grow good hair on their cheeks. There's nothing wrong with that. It's just what happens.
Oh dear. Absolutely right, Andy. No, that's right. That's right. And
people.
Given that we now know that we're going to be talking about a beardless man in the near future, we should probably get used to thinking these ways. Yeah. Ingvild, everyone's sister. This is one of those nicknames that's primarily worth pointing out because it's just so weird. But it also reminds us that women often served as the social bridges between men. Male friendships and family ties were often traced through women and through marriage, and a large clan was more or less unified based to a degree on the strength of those bonds. A woman like Ingvild, who is everyone's sister, gives us one of those moments when the sagas hint at those complex social webs.
Yes.
But in this case, she may just have a lot of siblings.
I hope that's not the reason. That's much less interesting.
Eldjarn the Generous, or Mildi. Eldjarn is that nice young man from Norway who marries Glum's daughter Thorlag, despite the fact that she's already married to Killer-Skuta. The English translation of the Generous doesn't really capture the full and almost saintly nature of Eldjarn's name. The Icelandic word mildi can mean mercy or grace or kindness. It's a cognate of the Anglo-Saxon word mildust, which is used to describe Beowulf at his funeral. The use here means that Eldjarn is the merciful, the kind, or even the gracious.
Now, is that the etymological origin of the word mild?
I believe it is, yeah. Although obviously the meaning has shifted a great deal over the centuries.
Sure.
The point here is that the name is meant to refer to his generous character rather than his donations to charity.
Okay.
It sets him up as the polar opposite of the name Killer-Skuta, or for that matter, his new father-in-law, Killer Gloom. All in all, it's probably best that the newlyweds fled to Norway right after their wedding. A guy like Eldjarn the Gracious probably wouldn't survive long after cuckolding a man named Killer-Skuta.
That's right. Get out of town.
Orm the Grumbler, or Rela. This isn't worth spending a ton of time on. I just like it. Some of these names are just interesting glimpses into a world in which people use nicknames as identifiers. And it gives me a chuckle to think of a slightly cranky guy whose neighbors all think of him as the Grumbler.
It's like a looking into your future.
Well, well, I want to also remember that this guy, and I'm going to ignore that, this guy does hang on to a lawsuit over half a mark of silver owed to him.
Oh, nice.
It suggests that he might be a bit of a sullen fellow, prone to holding on to minor grudges.
Mm-hmm.
Thorberg Cheekstruck, or Hogvinkini. This is definitely one of the shaming nicknames, like Twist Leg, or for that matter, Henthor. This is actually an inversion of Kino Hogfik, which means to strike a blow on the cheek. Thorberg's nickname refers to an event in this saga during the fight with Killer Gloom, when Thorfinn Arnarsson lands a blow on him. That blow is never compensated. In the settlement, the blow is balanced against Thorberg's fault in provoking the fight. So his nickname is a reminder that he received a blow which he never paid back. For shame, Thorberg. Thorstein Fishing Pole. I know this is a favorite of yours. I was really intrigued by this one too, because everything I've read suggests that fishing in medieval Iceland was conducted almost entirely by net fishing, not pole fishing. And once I looked into it, it turns out the term literally means stick, or, pole in the sense of a pole, a staff, which means that this apparently refers to some kind of a hooked pole used for retrieving a fishing net or trap from the water.
Okay.
Since most fishing was done from ships, that makes sense. It doesn't tell us why this well-known dueling champion is named for a fishing tool, but I'm not a miracle worker. I can only go with what we've got here.
That's good enough.
Arnor Crone's Nose. Kerlingarnef. Who would have thought that a saga with Kettle Flatnose in it would have an even better nose nickname?
Yeah.
Arnor gets around in the sagas. He shows up in some of the better-known Thatr, especially Bolli Boluson's Tale, and he's featured in Laxdala Saga. And everywhere he goes, his crone's nose precedes him. Technically, the name Kerlingarnef is more neutral than the English translation, but it still means old woman's nose. But I tend to read that as being in the sense of a gossip, since older women are proverbial in the sagas for their love of chatter. So there may not be anything odd about his actual physical nose. Arnor is possibly just a bit of a water cooler gossiper. Thorod the Grinder. Hearthjaxel. As I said during the summary of this saga, Thorod's name isn't a reference to his dance technique. The English translation of grinder evokes the whale hunting method of the grind, or the grind, but we'll be talking about the grind in more detail at a future point.
Okay.
Thorod's name is meant to indicate his gritty character. It's not actually a reference to whaling. The first half of his name is the same as the nickname of King Harald Hardrada, right? Harold the Hard Dealer, so hard. Yaxel refers to a tooth, the molar specifically. So the literal meaning is hard tooth, but the implication is that Thorod is a tough customer. On the other hand, he only appears for one battle in the saga and he gets killed during it, so the name may be a bit of a misnomer.
Interesting.
And Thorgir Butterring.
Oh, my favorite.
Now we're getting to the main attraction. Thorgir is a man of limited intellect and virtually no common sense.
But he's really good with a sheep's head on a pole.
He absolutely is. And by God, he knows what he likes, and he likes butter rings. Now, in modern Scandinavian baking, Andy, butter rings are a kind of cookie or pastry, and they look delicious. In fact, my mother used to make little cookies she called cream cheese rings. Okay. And she was German, so presumably they've enjoyed some popularity outside the Vikings' lands.
Well, I would love to try a butter ring.
Oh, they're delicious. But the text also tells us that Thorgir, quote, thought no food was as good as bread and butter.
There you go.
So presumably the reference is to a kind of ring bread, which might be a kind of circular braided bread. And Thorgir's not the only one with a nickname based on his love of dinner rolls, by the way. There's also an Einar buttered bread in 10th century Orkney, who's a grandson of Thorfinn the Skullsplitter. But if that's the case, it still wouldn't be anything like the bread you're probably imagining right now, because bread in this era in Iceland was unleavened and was fire-baked, not oven-baked. There are a few kinds of bread that might have been made, so Thorgeir's preference might be for either a kind of stone-cooked flatbread, a pan-cooked wheat or rye biscuit, or a heavy hearth bread cooked in a fire's ashes. In any case, bread wasn't necessarily a daily staple, so Thorgeir does actually have somewhat extravagant tastes.
Well, maybe he just likes to eat butter.
Well, possibly. It's a conveyance. I actually went and found a recipe for hearth bread this weekend, just to get an idea of what Thorgeir might have liked. I'll put the recipe up online if anyone else wants to try it. It's not bad, but I have to say that Thorgeir's right. It's better with butter on it. Or maybe some honey and cheese if you like that sort of thing.
Okay.
So, what do you think? Who's our winner?
Well, okay. So there are 3 candidates here that are legit. We've got Thorstein Fishing Pole. Mm-hmm. Great choice. Ingvild, everyone's sister.
It's a great name.
I'm fascinated by that one. And obviously Thorgeir Buttering. As much as I would love to give it to Ingvild, everyone's sister, I'm not the kind of guy that's going to turn down Thorgeir Buttering.
I don't think anyone can turn down Thorgeir Buttering. I don't even think this is a contest. I almost felt bad coming up with all these different discussions of nicknames, knowing that Thorgeir was waiting at the end of the line.
Well, we know how you love to waste everyone's time. So.
Oh, now. So we agreed? Thorgeir Buttering it is?
Definitely. He's a champion of nicknames.
Excellent.
That's the only thing he's champion of.
Well. Notable witticisms. All right, so Andy, I think you're going to start us off in this category. What do you got?
Okay, so my first one here is pretty simple, but it does carry huge repercussions in the saga. It comes from chapter 16 when Oskil, Hals, and Vaemund are riding along through Eyjafjord when they spot Steingrim and his men coming away from the hot spring baths. Now Hals then turns to Vaemund and says with a snide look on his face, "Steingrim keeps on trying to wash off the dishonor he got when you had him struck with a sheep's head. But it's going to be a long struggle before he gets it all washed off."
Oh, man. Yeah, no, there are huge repercussions for this. Remember that Oskil is angry because he fears that Hall's voice may have carried across the river to Steingrim.
And, in fact, it does. While the line is a clever reinforcement of Steingrim's shame for the sheep tapping given to him by old Thorgeir Buttering, the insult ends up costing Oskil his life.
True, and Steingrim also dies with several of his men, so this little witticism was a costly one.
Yeah, I almost feel bad for Steingrim, but only almost. I mean, to be honest, I never really cared about him at all. What's your first candidate?
Wow, you're just gonna let that sit there.
Yeah, that's it.
My first example comes from actually pretty late in the saga. This is an episode toward the end of the Killer-Skuta feud. As Skuta's trying to escape from Glum's men, he uses the old Bugs Bunny routine of quick changing by turning his cloak inside out.
Bugs Bunny routine, huh?
Yeah.
Okay.
Bugs did it all the time. Skuta then pranks his pursuers with a bit of wordplay. When they run up, he tells them that he saw Skuta riding away along that hillside over there. When they somewhat suspiciously ask him his name, he responds, "I am called many in Mývatn, but few in Fiskalek." They, for some reason, accept that as an answer, and he rides away. It's not until the men report to Glum that the joke is revealed, such as it is. Skuta's name means cave, and there are a lot of those in Mývatn, but not as many in the Fiskalek area.
Did we change his accent there, or his voice? I feel like
no, he's missing teeth.
Oh, that's right. I had trouble doing that. Okay. Anyway, it is a strange joke, but it's an interesting one. A very specific reference, presumably requires a local's knowledge of the area. I mean, unless we're supposed to believe that Mývatn is famous all over for its caves, rather than for its clouds of black flies.
Yeah, I mean, there are a couple of reasons I'm bringing this one up. One is that the misdirection, coupled with a pun that isn't explained till later, is absolutely typical of the trickster and outlaw traditions. Up to this point, Skuta hasn't given us the slightest hint that he's a trickster figure. The closest thing to a gag he's pulled so far was to tie Grim naked on a fly-infested island and leave him to die. But somehow a thread of the trickster tradition makes its way into the saga here.
It's actually more entertaining to me for being so out of place. It's really a random bit of cartoon humor in this saga that's so sorely lacking in witty lines.
That's true. And there's one more thing about this. It does mean that Skuta's name, with his nickname attached, means Killer Cave. Mm-hmm. And that's a really impressive name. That sounds like someplace you'd go on Halloween. I always appreciate good names, so there you go.
You would think you'd have mentioned that in the nickname section.
Well, you know.
Yeah. Anyway, I do like that one, but I think you missed an even better one from earlier in that same chapter, that same scene.
Oh, which one?
Well, you remember the situation, right? So Skuta initially spots Gloom riding up along the valley wearing a big green cape, and he wants to go catch him.
Right. This is where we learn that Skuta's got that fancy reversible black and white cloak.
Exactly. So anyway, Skuta traps Gloom in a shieling, and then Skuta has his sword fly with him, but Gloom finds himself unarmed. And this prompts.
Wait, now we're back to now we're back to it being a sword.
Yeah, it's just. Oh, is it?
Did Schrodinger's weapon come out as a sword this time?
It did. I forgot. Yeah. In fact, the author allows for it to be either a sword or an axe. So in this case, I'm going sword.
Fair enough.
I forgot about that. Anyway, this prompts Gloom to say that there would not be much question which of them were the better fighter if they were both armed. But given the circumstances, he declares, "I'm not about to run out onto your weapon."
Well, it's a good point, and it's a good line.
Yeah, it is, but it's not the one that I want to use here. I'm kind of sneaking that one in. The actual witticism's coming up. So remember that Gloom then ran away, and he ran straight to the nearby gully. Skuta was in hot pursuit and saw Gloom dive down into the gully, but he tried to follow, but Skuta couldn't find an easy way down. Suddenly he spots Gloom's green cape drifting down at the bottom of the gully, so he makes his way down and thrusts his spear straight through the cape. And that's when he hears a voice from up above say, "Not much credit in spoiling people's clothes."
Yeah, that's the line.
Yes, it is. This is just classic, and it is kind of Bugs Bunny-esque. But I kind of imagine him as a smug Errol Flynn's Robin Hood looking on Gloom's. I kind of imagine him as a smug Errol Flynn's Robin Hood looking at old Skuta down there, standing on the ledge from above. It's a great scene, and it's a great line.
Excellent. And while we're on the subject, I'd like to include Gloom's poem just a few lines later.
Oh, okay. Well, as long as we are sticking with the Gloom-Skuta confrontation, I suppose it does make sense to include the only verse in the entire poem.
Yeah, and this is another bit of outlaw-esque writing from our author. Mm-hmm. So, right after that clothes gag, Skuta mocks Gloom with the taunt, "Now you've got this to remember, Gloom, that you've run away and not dared to wait for Skuta." Now, leaving aside Skuta pulling a Mr. T move by referring to himself in the third person,
I pity the
Skuta's
Gloom.
got a point.
But, as we said during the episode, both of these guys are too smart to try to make an unarmed stand against an armed foe.
Oh, definitely. So, Gloom, saying that he'll make Skuta run before the day's out, then speaks a half verse. "It's worth a piece of silver, each bush south of the river. The wide woods often cover, outlaw and wolf together." It's really an outlaw story motif, with the reference to the green wood for outlaws to hide in and so forth. But I'm mainly including it because it deserves recognition as a slightly clever response to Skuta's taunt. But I have to say only slightly clever. It's probably not a winner. Have you got anything else?
Here's the thing, John. We just covered 3 different lines from the same chapter. And all of them, they are pretty good candidates, but...
Yeah, I guess. So what's the problem?
Well, you don't find it a little bit odd that all the best lines are in one chapter of this saga?
I think I know where you're going with this.
Uh-huh. Yeah. Then by all means, if you know what I'm going to say it for me. Save me the breath.
Oh, see? I think you're planning to point out that this chapter of Reykjadal Saga, which is the 26th chapter, is identical to chapter 16 of Killer Gloom Saga.
That is exactly what I was going to say. You read your introduction. We've mentioned before that this author doesn't like to use direct discourse, and his narrative style tends to be pretty dry all around. It's an unusual chapter.
Right, and this chapter sticks out like a sore thumb in the saga. It's dynamic, it's full of action. I shouldn't even say a sore thumb, it sticks out like a good thumb on a sore body. It's witty, it's got a cool poem, it's got clever dialogue.
Yeah.
I mean, it's clearly not the work of the Reykjadal author.
No, so I don't know if that means we've got a problem for our notable witticism category or not. I mean, right now, we've only got one candidate from the actual saga.
Right.
That's kind of sad. So I'll try to correct that by throwing in another quick one.
Okay.
So this one comes from chapter 18, where Thorberg Cheekstruck convinces the 3 Norwegian brothers, Vagen Spear, Navar Shortsword, and Skeffil Sword, to come home with him rather than wait for Gloom to show up as they had agreed.
Right. They're friends of Gloom's and had arranged to stay with Gloom and his father Giri. But Gloom and Geary are so busy that they couldn't meet the Norwegians at the harbor that day and bring them down to the farm.
Yeah, and so it's part of Thorberg's plan to make Gloom look bad to the Norwegians so that they'll come home with him instead, thus shaming Gloom and ruining his reputation. Now, he tells the brothers that Gloom and Geary simply don't have the means for taking in freeborn men for whom it matters how they're treated.
Which is pretty insulting.
Oh, it's very insulting. But then he goes on to kind of rub it in. He says, that father and son are so badly off that when the first bite is eaten, the second is nearly finished. Now, I know that's a proverb, but it's cleverly used here.
And it works. I mean, the Norwegians do end up going home with Thorberg.
Yeah. So, the question remains. We've got 2 actual candidates from the actual saga, presumably written by the saga author, and then 3 really good ones, which are definitely not written by the saga author. So, how do we decide this one?
That's a very good question. Well, I think we have to say that the verse is not a winner. So we're really down to 2 and 2.
Okay.
I'm going to say Hall's line isn't actually very clever. It's significant in the saga, but it's not a terribly clever line.
I'm going to agree with you. That was a reach, but I was trying to include something from the saga.
So I guess the question we have before us is whether the first bite is eaten and the second is nearly finished is sufficiently clever for us to stick to our guns and say that we can only use the Reykjadal author's actual words.
That is an interesting dilemma. And I'm inclined to say that's what we should do. But I also have a feeling that when we read Viga Gloom Saga, that we're going to find that there are plenty more fun lines to work with in notable witticisms.
Sure.
And maybe we could double up and reward one here. What do you think?
I mean, the question before us is, what is a saga?
Yeah.
Right? Is it what is now read as the saga, or is it what was originally written by the author?
That is a good question.
That's a deep and complex question that we could spend a lot of time on, but I don't want to.
No, me neither. So what do you want to do here?
So I think we need to just say that the saga is what the saga is, right? It's what we read. It's what a modern reader reads when they read the saga.
Yeah.
We don't insist on sticking to any one manuscript tradition when we have more than one manuscript to work from. So I don't have a problem with moving into the stuff that's been seeded in from other places.
Okay. So, do you have a preference on this one?
Well, now having said that, I don't.
That's the funny thing. I don't really have a strong preference either, which I think speaks to the, the whole problem of this saga.
Well,
I just don't have strong feelings here.
We've considered before the possibility of not awarding a category. Do we feel like we've finally gotten to that point? Have we found a saga lacking?
There are a couple of witty lines here. I think in terms of true wit, there's 2 choices here. There's 3 really, but
I would say the line that you threw in as a red herring, I'm not about to run out onto your weapon, is actually a pretty good line.
I kind of like that one too. You know what? Let's just be silly and give it to Gloom for I'm not going to run out onto your weapon, even though I didn't.
A write-in candidate, as it were.
Yeah. It was a dark horse.
Excellent. Okay. Excellent. Well done, Gloom.
Outlawry.
Now, I don't really think there's much question about who should be outlawed here, though I'm sure that you're going to try to throw a wrench into things like you always do.
Oh, I might have a minor wrench to throw, but go ahead and get us started.
You and your wrenches. I've got 2 candidates, but I'm only going to consider... Well, actually, I'll consider both of them. That's why I have 2 candidates.
Oh, yes, but I'm the one with the wrenches.
Yeah. Well, I thought that one was better than the other, but now that I think about it, I think they're kind of even. So I'm going to start off with Vaemund, the wayward nephew of Oskil. Now, I'm not going to list out his crimes, though most of them are quite petty. They're ridiculous and downright shameful. Right.
It speaks to how many there are that we would have to basically read the first half of the saga to get all of his crimes.
Yeah, exactly. He's basically going around trying to cheat everyone out of their goods at all times and just generally causing problems. Now, it doesn't matter how many times his uncle comes to rescue him, how many times Oskil establishes a settlement in his favor or uses political influence to save Vaemund's life. This Vaemund's always up to no good. And if you listen to the first summary episode, then you know exactly why he should be outlawed. Heck, everyone tried to outlaw him time and time again, but they never managed to get the job done. And so I think we'd be within reason if we were to reach back into the text from 2016 and serve up a bit of Saga Thing justice.
Wow. Well, it's a strong case.
Yeah.
I think there needs to be some competition here, and I think we do have to seriously consider Thorir Ketilsson, a.k.a. Thorir Flatnose.
Oh, come on.
Now, wait a minute. For starters, is that name. Is this guy the son of Kettle Flatnose, or isn't he?
That shouldn't
The saga
matter.
says he's Flatnose's son, but all we know is that he says this. Kettle Flatnose, we know all his kids, and none of them are named Thorir. Then the saga says that he's named Flatnose, but no one by that name is known anywhere else in the sagas.
You want to outlaw him because he's
No.
an invention of the saga author?
I'm establishing his bona fides.
Okay.
I'm assuming there's some kind of fraud going on here is my point. But his crimes are that he's responsible for killing not one, but 2 chieftains in this saga.
Oh, no, that's more serious.
And he's outlawed from 2 different districts before he finally gets killed by Skuta, which was probably the only thing that would stop his lawless rampage. I actually think he's a reasonably good candidate. And remember, he's the one who kills the saintly Askell.
That's true. That's very true. Although I would say he does get killed by Skuta, so the problem resolves itself in the saga. I'm more interested in people that
I think you're jumping ahead to our decision-making process.
Oh, sorry. Let me go with my second candidate. Now, this one might be more deserving of outlawry. Thorberg Cheekstruck. He emerges as the more deadly but equally conniving villain of the saga's second half. He's one of Killer-Skuta's most significant enemies. Not only is he an element of chaos in the region, not unlike Vaemund in the first half of the saga, but Thorberg is responsible for so many failed assassin plots that he simply deserves outlawry just for not figuring out how to get the job done right after the first 6 tries. In many ways, he's more despicable than Vaemund, if only because not only does he do the petty things, but he does more violent crimes, and he has more power and more natural ability. So, that's what I've got. Those are my 2 candidates. You go ahead and throw this wrench that I have a feeling you're about to throw. Come on. Muck up the works with your nonsense.
No. It's not mucking up the works. Although I do have just one more option.
I know you do.
Throughout this saga, there's a man involved with one failed plot after another. One man who hires more assassins, breaks more peace deals, and plots more ambushes than any other.
I think you're exaggerating a little.
I think you know who I'm talking about, Andy. It's your newest Thingman, Thorgir the Gothi. For a guy you touted last time as being a wonderful man and a steal as Thingman, he certainly is a nefarious troublemaker in this saga. Andy, I have to ask you, when one of Thorgir's many, many plots failed, and he then refused to lift a finger to help his friend Grim, who was trapped and dying out on Hraven Rock, do you think he lost even a moment's sleep over his betrayal? Or is that cold-hearted treachery something that you actually approve of in a Thingman?
That's mighty rich coming from someone who supports Snorri Gothi. Yeah. I'm not going to dignify that with a response. I've already said my piece on the status of Thorgir Gothi in this saga, the fictionalized version of Thorgir. So we're not even going to consider him.
That's what we're going with.
He's not a legit candidate, nor is your first one in terms of your complaints about who he is. I mean, the saga author is very clearly inventing things just for some kind of credibility.
No, so, I think. Having the candidates laid out in front of us like this, I think it's fairly clear. Just the fact that, as you pointed out, we would have to essentially reread out loud the first half of this saga just to list all of Vaemund's crimes. Yeah. To me, he's a pretty solid candidate.
Well, I thought so at first, but the more I thought about Thorberg Cheekstruck, the more I wanted to outlaw him. And I would also point out that Thorberg Cheekstruck, he lives through the end of the saga. Never gets killed, never gets a comeuppance. Just goes off into the sunset.
Well,
That's
we're
not
vigilantes, Andy. We're here to administer justice.
Yeah, that's what I'm trying to do.
And I would point out that Vaemund dies peacefully in his own bed and never actually has to deal with the shame of his actions.
Oh, so we're going to resurrect him and send him out?
If that's your concern. Hey, Oliver Cromwell was tried after his death. Why can't Vaemund be?
All right. You know what? Because Vaemund is so ridiculous. I mean, Thorberg is a kind of a standard stock saga character.
Yeah.
I'm going to forgive him this time, though. I'm
not forgiving him.
No. I'm saying my better judgment says we should outlaw him, but Vaemond he's got that Henthor quality that just says, outlaw me. So, let's do it.
Off you go, Fringe Boy.
Big man.
All right, now we come to what I know is Andy's favorite part of the Judgment episode.
Not this
where
time.
This is where each of us chooses a man or a woman from the saga to join our growing band of Thingmen, to join us in our halls. I went first last time, so Andy, for better or for worse, you get first pick from Reykjadal Saga. Take it away.
It's very interesting. I'm glad you said woman, because Ingvild, everyone's sister, seems like a very good person to have on your side, doesn't it?
That's a good point. She's got a lot of friends.
Yeah, it didn't occur to me, you're reading the saga, but, now that I think about it, she would be good. Mm-hmm. No, I mean, I know we talked about this kind of when you went first on Finnbogi Saga, and I was wondering why you chose to go first.
And now you know.
Now that I've read Reykjadal Saga, I understand, because it's one of those problems of, there's really not a lot of candidates to choose from. I think it comes down to Oskel or Killer-Skuta, because there's so much focus on a lot of negative characters in the saga.
Mm-hmm.
So, I'm left with a dilemma. I'm not particularly moved towards either one of them.
Mm-hmm.
Oskel, I would say, he fits the characteristics of the kind of guy that I like to choose. I like to choose the wise ones. I like to choose men with noble characters.
Is that what you tell yourself?
Influence and power. That's what I've always told myself, and I think I follow through on that usually. But my problem with Oskel is this. Oskel doesn't actually accomplish his goals. He's a good, loyal uncle. He takes care of his nephew. But in the end, he never solves the problem. He never controls his nephew, influences his behavior in any significant way. Mm-hmm. That's disappointing to me. And equally disappointing to me is the fact that Oskel, he's not really in the saga. He just kind of shows up and we get the report of him creating settlements. He doesn't do much in the saga. He's not a living character. Skuta, on the other hand, is more alive in the saga, though not much. And I think this time around I'm running low on bruisers, and you've got your Greters and your other kind of violent characters, and I need someone who can contend with them a little bit. And Skuta's that kind of guy. He's intelligent, he's wise, he's good with a sword. So I'm going to take Skuta this time around.
Wow, that's quite a pick. That is a slightly surprising pick, given the kind of person Skuta is. I'm not surprised you've taken him given the kind of person he is, but I'm surprised that you're pretending it's a good thing.
I'm not sure what you're trying to imply, given the fact that I know you would have taken Skuta had I taken Oskel. But
not true, actually. You've done a good job of summarizing the pros and cons of both Oskel and Skuta. And I think so I'll be brief. I think you've actually made a good argument for why I wouldn't have taken either one of them.
You're gonna pull a minor character out of the saga.
Not a minor character at all. I think as you look back at the saga, you'll realize that there are a number of other characters who are fairly major figures. And if we
I suspected you might do this.
If we cast our minds back to the first half of this saga, Oskel the Gothi has a friend and partner he relies on over and over again to help him negotiate one peace after another. Even in the face.
Is this guy also in Finnbogi Saga?
He's around. Yes, he is.
Does his name begin with E?
Yes, it does. And he relies on this friend even in the face of the provocations of Oskel's obnoxious nephews. His friend, as you have surmised, is Eyjolf Valgerðarson, and he's repeatedly shown to be Oskel's equal in creating settlements. But unlike Oskel, Eyjolf's willing to use every weapon in the chieftain's arsenal to maintain a sense of justice and fair play. Andy, I'm sure you'll recall that Kristni's saga, the saga of the conversion of Iceland, lists Eyjolf as being one of the 3 greatest chieftains of Iceland at the end of the 10th century.
I think Thorgeir Gothi plays a big role in that too.
I don't believe he's listed as being one of the 3 greatest chieftains of Iceland at the end of the 10th century. He's also one of the strongest voices for conversion, making him the epitome of both the proto-Christian of the Icelandic 10th century and the early adopter Christians ushering in a new era of law and justice in the 11th. He's also the descendant of Helgi the Lean and the father of Gudmund the Powerful. He's a force for peace throughout most of this saga, a friend and peer of the saintly Oskel. He's a mover, a shaker, a blood taker, and a peacemaker, and he's my new thingman. Take a bow, Eyjolf Valgerðarson.
You'll forgive me if I'm not impressed. You see...
Oh, I think
I'm
you should be very impressed.
I would encourage all of our listeners to pick up a copy of your Reykjadal Saga och Killer-Skuta and check out how many pages Eyjolf Valgerðarson appears on.
Nearly every one in the first half of the saga, I think.
No. Check out how many times he actually is physically on the screen and does
repeatedly, routinely. And
at the
conclusion and resolution of every struggle, there he is, speaking for Steingrim's side and being a friend to Oskel when no one else will be.
I would characterize my emotional response to your selection as disappointment.
Oh, green with envy.
I'm disappointed in you.
I for one am very pleased with my choice.
That's because you like, well, we're not going to keep arguing, but you have taken liberties, my friend.
I have not.
Liberties.
Anyone who reads the saga is going to agree with me. You're just counting on the fact that nobody's going to read this damn saga.
Who's got access to it? Now, shall we move on to final judgments?
Final rating.
Now, I think it's your turn to go first with final judgments, so I'm going to turn it over to you, John. Let us know kind of what you think of this saga. Give it a score.
Oh, God, where to begin? Look, I'm going to lay my cards out right away. And I think I've laid them out over the course of our 4 hours plus talking about the saga. This is not a great saga. I know I've shocked you there, so I'll explain myself. It's got some real problems with pacing. Its authorial voice routinely raises questions about its own authenticity. It's repetitive, and it's probably more than a little revisionist. It's very hard to get a sense of the character of almost anyone in the saga, partly because the author is strangely resistant to dialogue, which we talked about just a little while ago. We had to cheat a bit even in order to get the limited dialogue we did offer during the summary episodes. Entire chapters go by in this saga with all the dialogue being reported secondhand. That's understandable and maybe even laudable from an historical perspective, but it puts a serious crimp in the usual flow of a saga narrative. Andy, you and I talked a bit about being able to use this saga to look at the narrative logic of feud culture. And reading Reykjadal has inspired us to put together a short saga brief on that. It'll be coming up in the next few weeks. But while it's true that this saga rewards a narrative-based reading, it's mainly true because the narrative lays its agenda so bare that we can't help but see the stitches that hold the story together. When I finished reading this, I didn't feel that I'd read a saga so much as a saga draft. Now,
I feel the same way.
I'm enough of a saga nerd that Reykjadal is fascinating to me for all the reasons I'm talking about. I'm especially intrigued by that rough draft quality. I think the idea that this saga represents an unfinished and unpolished saga in its protean form raises some great questions, especially for the book prosist argument that the sagas are writerly compositions from an early stage in their development. The problem is, I don't buy it for a second. This is not a draft. It is, first and last, a saga written by someone who's probably not entirely confident in what they're doing. That's not a deal breaker. I felt similarly about a couple of the warrior poet sagas, but those offered compensatory pleasures. Vivid descriptions, clever poetry, interesting female characters, exciting travel, you name it. Reykjadal, by contrast, offers redundant plots, limited characterization. I think you were absolutely right that neither Skuta nor Askel really jumps off the page, and they're supposed to be our heroes. Virtually no consistent sense of space outside of major sites in the storyline. Remember we talked at one point about how abroad is just this one port somewhere where you travel to when you leave Iceland. There are plot elements in this saga that ought to be amazing. The three-way feud between Skuta, Glum, and Thorberg Cheekstruck should have made for great storytelling. Instead, it's so ignored that it was only on my second read-through that I even pieced together why Skuta's enemies couldn't just team up to crush him. And don't get me started on the frustrations of that missing section at the end. It still drives me nuts. Now, this saga's got its little treats. I mean, I don't think I'll ever get rid of the image of the dunder-headed Thorgir butter ring crashing through a crowd of people with a severed ram's head under one arm, shouting for help while Steingrim runs him down. But ultimately, this is a saga for saga nerds and completionists. I've struggled with a rating for this one, I really have. But in the end, I don't think I can go above a 3.5. I said it before and I'll say it again. This is not a great saga. It's worth a read for some enjoyable moments, but it's got some real limitations as an example of the saga writer's art.
Yeah, you know, I think you've said most of what I wanted to say, actually. So maybe I can wrap it up very, very quickly. At least quicker.
Feel free.
But not that quick. So I'll just say this. My first impression of the saga was not favorable at all. The characterizations are extremely weak. The writing is too vague, or at least too disinterested in what's going on. But that could be an intentional effect. I'll be generous and assume that the author may be going for a tone that lends itself to historical veracity. But I don't buy that either, even if I appreciate the attempt at doing that. The real failure is in the author's inability to take advantage of the material he's collected, and it seems like he's collecting stuff at this stage. The two heroes of the saga, Oskil and Skuta, are little more than shadow figures. Although I would say Eyjolf Gerson is even more of a shadow figure. Almost
I disagree.
As if he's barely in the saga, but whatever. Oskil's not a huge character. So I don't get why the few scholars who do talk about Reykjadal saga put him on such a pedestal. But I went over that in the Thingman section, so I'm not going to dwell on it here. My initial impulse is to score the saga very, very low. But the more we dug into the saga, I have to say, the more we teased out these various threads of the developing feuds, the more I began to appreciate something of the author's ability to weave together a fairly complex narrative. And if you're curious about how regional feuds in saga literature work, and how they evolve and all the components of the feud, then Reykjadal saga does a pretty good job. But I'd also say that there are far better sagas out there to explore that same subject. I don't need to name one, just pick a saga and you'll typically find it. And it will be more likely a more entertaining read as well. So I want to give this saga a 3 because, like you said, it feels more like a draft than a complete saga. But after our discussions and after I read Arian's lovely assessment of the saga, I found myself and my resolve weakening, as sometimes happens with me. So in honor of Arian, I'm giving this a 1-point bonus. Reykjadal saga, you're getting a 4 from me.
There you go. 3.5 from me and a 4 from Andy.
Yeah.
Well, that about does it for this saga. We'll be back in a few weeks or so with a saga brief about Jesse Byock's theory of feudemes, which should help shed some light on the structure and narrative development of saga literature.
Exactly, yes. And as I said, Reykjadal saga got us thinking about the various discussions of feud in the Icelandic sagas out there, and we thought it a great opportunity to share some of those with you. So don't be surprised, John, if I end up throwing some William Ian Miller at you in the feudemes brief.
Oh, by all means.
Exciting.
The more Icelandic scholars, the merrier, I say.
Now, I believe we're planning to record this one live when we see each other at Kalamazoo in a few weeks. Is that right?
That's the plan. But we've made that plan before and never quite pulled it off. All the same, I think we can do it this time around, though.
Well, and then after a very brief hiatus, we will return with our summer saga.
That's right. We're very excited to be tackling the saga of the people of Floy this summer. And thanks to all our listeners who voted for it, we're going to have a blast.
Oh, now that's just cruel. Poor Team Floamana putting all their effort into trying to get that one up.
No. Obviously, we're kidding. After a fierce battle between Team Ale and Team Njal, the people have chosen and decided on Njal's saga for our summer saga.
Yes, it was actually really close, John, and I thought Team Ale had it at the end there. The vote literally went into the final hour of the final day with the two of them tied.
It's amazing.
Team Ale staged an impressive comeback over the last day or so, but in the end, Njal's saga won the vote. Now, I know there was a lot of enthusiasm last Saturday, which was really fun to see. Our good friend Brandon Hawk really led the charge for Njal.
Well, I wouldn't have put it past Brandon to have hired some students to go and vote. But however it happened, Njal pulled out a lot of extra votes in in that final hour or so. Yeah. So congratulations to Team Njal. You'll get your saga.
I've got to be honest, I'm a little nervous about this one. And I know you have a sense of how to break Njal's saga up, but even with clean breaks in the narrative, this is a daunting task, and I'm almost afraid it's going to carry us through to next year.
Oh, it won't take that long. 4 months tops.
Sure, John, sure. But, in the meantime, we want to thank you all for your participation in the poll and for your active support on our social media sites. It's a lot of fun.
Right. And I want to point out, just to reassure everyone, the point is that we are going to get to all the sagas eventually. So we will still be doing Ale and Laxdala and indeed the saga of the people of Floy.
There you go, Team Floy.
But in the meantime, you can join the conversation on Twitter, where we are Saga Thing, at Saga Thing Pod.
Or you can join us on Facebook, where we're Saga Thing Podcast.
And as always, you can get in touch with us on our email, sagathingpodcast@gmail.com.
Yes, and remember to send us your pictures of saga-related statues and monuments. We've got some good ones up there now, so that project is starting to take shape like we wanted it to. And when you send your pictures, try to tell us a little bit about where you are and anything of interest about the site that you might know, or the statue or the monument or whatever you're showing us.
And while you're at it, we'll also accept saga-related sites. And for proof of that, you can go to the statues and monuments page on our website and look for the pictures of Andrew Midgemouth.
Yes, I love that one. And if you're such a big fan of the podcast, then you also have two options. You can go to our Saga Thing store and get yourself a mug or a t-shirt to impress all your friends. And you can access that through our website by clicking on the Saga Thing store link.
Beer always tastes better out of my Saga Thing mug.
It does indeed. And your other option is then to head over to the iTunes website and write us a quick review for the podcast. I know that can be annoying, but it really helps to get the podcast noticed. The more reviews we have, the more likely people are to try the podcast out and take it seriously.
Absolutely. And with that, I think we're finally done.
Yay.
Good night, sweet Reykjadal Saga, and flocks of angels sing me to thy rest.
Flocks of Narfies, in my opinion. Thanks for listening, everyone.
Bye for now.
You need to read my mind faster.